Welcome to Practice Underwater. Today is a very big day. It's Matt's birthday.
29th. Thank you, George. Appreciate that.
Very welcome. And it's also a big day because we introduce kind of a major shift for us. I mean, I think calling it anything less than a major shift would just be a lie. I mean, this is, we're switched to analytics softwares. And, we've been working on this for a long time. And today's the day that we're announcing it. And so I'm really excited to talk about Dental Intel, which is the episode for today. And I'm sure that we need to do some backstory. So I'm sure this is going to be a longer introduction where we sort of talk about this whole thing because for a lot of you, it might seem like a surprise. This is something that we've been working on since really October. And so, Matt, I mean, do you have anything you want to add before I just kind of get started?
No, just walk everyone through kind of the journey of how we got to today.
Sure. So I was at Breakaway in October and I was there and I met Rob. Rob Bay is the president of Dental Intel and he's in charge of their product development. And so he's, there's the two guys that really started the company. There's the CEO, Weston, and then there's Rob, the president. And, and I'm sure there's other people involved in the starting of it. I don't want to be, leaving anyone out, but, Rob is really focused on improving the products and the practice management side and making sure that they're delivering value to the customer base. And so him and I got to talking and I've just always been really impressed with his practice management knowledge. And I think I was always really, really impressed with how aligned we seem to be, like his philosophy and, they obviously just like us, analytics-based practice management. I think we both we call it something called analytics-based practice management. They just sell analytics, but I think we both use analytics to see how to run a dental practice. And so naturally we're going to come to the same conclusions. And I think that in talking to Rob, that was one thing that was very clear for me in October. So I sort of went back to Matt and I said, hey, had a great conversation with Rob Bay, really liked the guy. Let's just vet their product. Let's just take a look at it. And this was the call that Matt and I had with Rob and then Curtis, who's in charge of kind of the department that works with coaching companies. And then Matt, I'll let you kind of talk about your impressions on that call because, and then I'll talk about mine.
Yeah, it was honestly eye-opening because, Practice by Numbers, what we've been using, it's not, I wouldn't call it intuitive. You don't see it and I understand this. With Dental Intel, you see it and you're like, wow, first of all, there's so much to it. It's so nicely organized. It's colorful. I enjoy that part of it. And it's really beefy. There's a ton of information on there. And then the simplicity of when we have our dashboard built, which will be done in mid-February, so much more proactive analytics. That's something we talk a lot about with Rob when we get to the interview. There's just a lot to it. I was honestly blown away. And George, you can talk about your reaction when you first saw it.
Yeah, so it's funny. Matt and we took the demo and then right afterwards we called each other. And I said, Matt, I can't stand it. And he goes, I loved it. And I'm like, you're kidding. And he's like, no, I thought it was better. And I'm like, there's no way that was better. And Matt was coming from the perspective of I'm not trying to offend you, Matt, but you're more of the not as big of an analytics nerd as I am, right? You're more of you're more relatable to a typical client of ours or a typical dentist who uses analytics software. You kind of care about a few things, you use it for your team, but you're not all about it. And me, I'm one of the biggest junkies there is. And so it was just a different platform. It had there was a lot of things that I didn't see that I wanted. And so we were sort of arguing about that a little bit. And so then he's like, and then you were encouraging me. I was about ready to shoot the whole thing down. And then you encouraged me just be honest with them about your feedback and just let them hear what you think. So we scheduled a follow-up call. And then I tell them look, honestly, you guys are missing a lot of stuff. And I feel like it's missing things that I need. And they were floored. And what ensued was a really cool conversation that was ongoing between Rob and myself, where we went back through our whole practice management philosophy, what analytics you use for what things. And there was, I would say it's so that the analytics that we have right there on the dashboard, he said over 50 in the interview. I'm not sure how many we have, but it's a lot. Mm-hmm. We have them kind of broken up into, I think 7 major categories. And it's, it's a kind of a beefy dashboard they're building us because we're, obviously we're analytics-based coaching. We're probably the most robust users of analytics in dentistry from a consulting side. And so, we need something very robust. And in that process, it was a lot of things that I presented to him that, ended up making it through. He was kind of impressed with certain things that he had never thought of before, like projecting the value of a hygiene visit based on the treatment accepted, the exam revenue, and the hygiene production. And then there was things on me that I was like very surprised. And a lot of the proactive, he took a lot of our reactive metrics and gave us proactive sister metrics or equivalent metrics that we can use to be more accurate. Because a lot of times when we're growing practices so quickly, we have to like almost disregard certain numbers. Like when we look at like one from the other service that we used to use, there was a metric like patient retention, 9-month patient retention. And for us, it's almost a totally worthless metric because we're growing practices so quickly and we're changing their retention systems proactively that it takes us like 18 months before that number is accurate. Versus if you just look at the projected retention, then it can be on a more like a 1 to 2 month basis can actually be accurate. And so at the pace of which we were growing practices, Rob helped us realize that there's a lot better metrics for us to try to see the things that we're trying to see. And so I think I would really call it a refinement of our philosophy, was really Rob and I getting together, and there were certain things that stayed and there was certain things that got enhanced using the new software. And so it was kind of a major move for us because we got to leave a relationship that we really liked, and we have to, train our entire team on new metrics, train our clients on new metrics, train our audience on new metrics. And also it's more expensive for us too, And so I think it's on a lot of levels, what was kind of a big risk for us. But I think that at least from our perspective, our greatest commitment is being the best at what we do. And it was very clear that as our coaching department transitions to be more team driven, right? Like when we started with analytics, we were Matt and myself talking to a dentist about coaching. And now, we have dozens of clients seeing our coaches, and that's coaches to dentist to office manager. We're much more team driven now. And what we found is that through the team, we've been getting much better results. And if the team is going to be getting the results, they also need to be using the software. And I think that was the big piece for us, is that this is a much more team friendly software that has much more there for the team. And I think that when you talk to Rob, and that was the thing that you really noticed upon the first conversation, you're like, whoa, it's much more actionable for the single office. And it took me a while to get there because I was kind of stuck on the stuff that was missing that I wanted. And so the other thing that I really appreciated about them is, I think in the process of working together, Rob is in charge of product development. And, I think he kind of told me like, look, man, like you've showed me a lot of things that, and they kind of want my input on that. And for me, that meant a lot because, quite frankly, like to have that type of say at a company like that is pretty cool. So, I think on a lot of levels, we're really, really excited about the future of this collaboration and partnership. And it's going to be an adjustment for our audience, right? There's going to be several practice underwater interviews that are going to have, PBN dashboards still as we're kind of, converting over. But, as time goes on, we're a Dental Intel dashboard. The shared practice dashboard will live on Dental Intel shared practice dashboard 2.0. And we'll really have a lot of those metrics there that we like and that we use for coaching and all those things. So, Matt, do you have anything you want to add before we get into it?
Yeah, I think it's just crazy how synergistic, you and Rob are as people, and then Dental Intel and Shared Practice are as companies. Like both,
Yeah.
like we believe similar things. Like you and him use different words for different terms, but they're talking about the same things. We believe in kind of the same general practice management philosophy based on analytics. It's weird that this person was just sitting out here for all these years and we haven't linked up until now. I'm so happy you happened to go to that breakaway event in October and meet each other because the similarities are honestly incredible. And as you were just talking there, I was thinking about I'm looking through the dashboard now and how much beefed up it is, and how if you ever seen George go through an old dashboard, he would have to do so much like multiplication and like moving numbers around to like explain what he was trying to talk about. Now we have numbers for them, like so that when we train our coaches, it's so much more easy for them to just be able to look at a number rather than like trying to remember what gymnastic George was doing in his head. That it's so much more actionable for our company.
Yeah, the one I'm really thinking of, which probably the one you're thinking of, is total value of a ReCare visit.
Yeah.
I would have to go to ReCare case acceptance, find out the ReCare treatment accepted per exam, then go find the average exam fee, then go find the average hourly production for an exam, add those all up together to get the, total value of a ReCare visit. And I tried training our coaches on that one and they got it, but like it was not easy.
No.
And to just make it a metric was just really nice.
It's such a rough number when you do that. And
yeah, because I can't keep calculating it every month. It's a hassle.
No.
Yeah. Yeah. That one's funny. I forgot about that. But I think the other thing is, you'll listen to it in the episode, but towards the end, he talks about average. And the whole discussion about average, it's like, if you wonder why we're so big on average, is because we're analytics people and he's an analytics person. And we look at percentiles all the time. And 50th percentile is average. And whenever we're looking at a client's practices, we're breaking it down into its parts and we're saying, this is average, this is A plus, this is a B. And then we're sort of going from there. And so I find that I hope that you guys listening to Rob will see a lot of the synergy that we've seen. And, I think we're really excited. It's definitely a transition for us, and it's going to take us a minute to get everything, I guess for our audience as well, to get used to the new numbers and everything like that. But I think, what we've seen is in the course of our coaching company is analytics-based practice management, and specifically proactivity works on a level that is honestly hard to believe. And we're really just doubling down on that and trying to become better at the things that we already do well. And that's why we're really excited about this collaboration. So I think without further ado, Matt, are we ready to jump into the interview?
One last piece, something he says in the interview that really got me was like, he can't wait to see our client's dashboard in a few months after using this. Like, he is so sure about his product that is going to grow our coaching and mastermind clients' practices, like, even further. And that's wild. I can't wait for that.
Yeah, I think we're just excited all around. I think this is something that we're really looking forward to. And he'll be there in July in Minneapolis, and we're excited to sort of keep advancing the field of analytics-based practice management that we both believe in, and we're excited about the future of that in our company and in collaboration with theirs. So, without further ado, here's Rob Bay with Dental Intel. Well, welcome to Practice Underwater. We have with us here today, I'm here with my partner, Matt Garino, Dr. Matt Garino, and we have Rob Bay, the president of Dental Intel. Very exciting day on Shared Practices, where we get to announce sort of our partnership with Dental Intel and, a lot of the new metrics and kind of combined expertise that we've really worked together on releasing something we're really excited about. So welcome back to the show, Rob.
Hey, thanks, George. And I'm really looking forward to spending some time with you and Matt, and looking forward to working with you here forward.
So I said, welcome back to the show. Do you remember the first time you were on the show talking with Richard about
it's been a while. It's been a while, but so I'm glad to be back and on the inside instead of the outside looking in.
And I gotta say, you're wearing a fresh hat there, where you cut out the letters to DNTL, INTL. Maybe you can send one my way.
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
We love the Dental Intel swag, so for sure we'll get you something.
Yeah,
like
we're
that.
all about our Shared Practices merch, so maybe we could ship each other some stuff.
We could swap. Yep.
Yeah, and it's great to have you guys back on, and there's been another service occupying our airwaves, and we're excited to bring Dental Intel back. And I'll tell the story with Rob on, kind of how this started, where I think the one thing that I was at Breakaway in October and I saw Rob there. And really, really impressed. And I think the one thing I've always been impressed with Rob is his practice management knowledge. I think as somebody in analytics, you also understand the practice management side of it as well. And I wanted to sort of ask you, your background and your developing that, how has that sort of come to you? And because I think that's one thing that you do really well is you understand what grows practices and then can gear your product to really deliver that need.
Yeah, I mean, and this is a really great question. I appreciate you asking it, because a lot of really what drives us at Dental Intel is not just data or visualization or numbers. I mean, that's easy to find and easy to come by. But if you're going to measure something, you better be doing something about it, right? If you're not going to be ultimately doing something about it, you shouldn't be measuring it. If it doesn't tell you that you need to stop something or start something, or improve something, there's really no reason to measure it. And so for us within our company and within our culture, we're all about improving the practice and ultimately patient care, team performance, profitability. So that's a huge part of what we do, is understanding why would somebody want to measure this? If it's not where it's supposed to be, what's contributing to it? How can we affect those things and ultimately help them to reach their goals or their objectives, whether that's just, providing better care to their patients or profitability. And I think that has proved itself out. We've looked at all of our customers' data and information, At this point, it's coming up on almost 9,000 customers. We looked at the year before they started using Dental Intel, and then the year after they started using Dental Intel, and it was around a $300,000 increase in production on average. So it's for us, it's all about what are the outcomes? How do you make yourself better with data? And you've got to have some of that understanding about how you get there in order to have the right system in place.
I think that was one thing that really stuck out to me and Matt is, when we initially did our demo with you and Curtis, we were very surprised at how much of an emphasis you guys place on actionability and making the data convenient and accessible for like a front office team member, for example, who's that person who actually results in that ROI. And so, a lot of this episode is going to be focused on, us analytics nerds, the new analytics that we're getting. But before we get there, can you talk about that delta of increase of $300,000 that you'd referenced? Like, where does that come from? And how is your product positioned in a way that really allows you guys to do that? Because that was the thing that really sold us.
Yeah, really where that's about is it's not just in somebody looking at data. They need to go take some action and do some things. And so they need to work with, somebody like you guys and your team who can help them along the way, or, they need to be experts in these areas, which it's hard for a dentist to do or to be. And so we've also built a lot of tools to help facilitate some of that. It's using AI, it's using a lot of back-end algorithms. So essentially we can say, if this is happening with a patient, let's kick off a workflow to solve that particular issue. If a patient doesn't reschedule, if a patient doesn't pay, if the patient needs to get scheduled, if a patient hasn't accepted treatment, if, whatever it may be, all of those types of things, we've built in tools where if you're a practice owner, if you imagine we're just spoon feeding little small bits of information to your team members about something that they need to do today. And it's a lot more prescriptive than just saying, oh, your case acceptance isn't where you want it to be. It's providing those specific opportunities to the team members where they can take action on it. And I know that, that's not necessarily getting into too much depth, but it's really facilitating that and then tracking that whole process all the way through to completion, all the way to that patient showing back up in your practice and revenue coming into your pocket.
Do you mind if we touch on details there? So say like...
can I use a specific example?
Yeah.
Which is actually one I'm thinking of, because I remember we were doing the demo and you guys showed us that there was like an opening on the schedule. And then there was a way that the software actually told you in order of priority, which patient is most likely to accept that opening if we had called them. And that's like kind of a very specific example. Can you talk about that feature as like an example of this type of concept, how you guys get that information and how it helps?
For sure. Yeah. All of this is based on machine learning, right? So we're learning about your patients and we're learning about patient behavior. We have 100 million patients in our database. And so we've been able to glean a little bit of information about patient behavior. So when you have an opening in your schedule, and let's say it's, for tomorrow at 4:00, if you were to click on that, it gives you a list of all the patients in order. And it's based on some algorithms that's around who are the people that like to come on Wednesday? Who are the people that like to come at 4:00? Who are people, that are most likely to show, that have unscheduled treatment? It's ranking based on, a couple dozen criteria to give you the best possible candidate. This is what we've found, because we've also done a lot of testing around this as well, that before, if you just have an opening and you're calling patients to show up for any opening, on average, it's going to take about 16 to 17 phone calls to get one patient scheduled. And that patient may or may not need anything more than just that cleaning. What we're looking at is how do we shorten that so it takes less time, less effort, but also gets you a patient that's more valuable. So by us going through the way that we're prioritizing these patients, we're cutting that down from essentially almost 17 calls to around 7 calls if you're actually doing it by making phone calls. And the average patient value is more than double. So less than half the effort, more than double the return on getting a patient into that spot. So that's an example of some of the ways that we're using that machine learning and AI to be able to enhance the data to where they can actually put it into action.
Wow, that's incredible. Talk a bit more in depth about how the team uses this. Like, do they have their own separate logins? Does it look different for a different type of staff member? Talk team utilization of this software.
Yeah, absolutely. So when this is set up, a practice can decide what their people can see or what they can do. So they have that control. And then when a specific team member logs in, they're going to see the things that relate to them and their particular role and what they're focused on. Yeah, they're going to be able to see the data and the dashboards and things that are shared with them. But they're also going to, when they log in, it's going to tell them, hey, there's 3 tasks that are assigned to you today. And you're going to follow up with patient A about this, and patient B about this, and patient C about that. And then it's going to give them statistics on how they performed around those things. So they're able to have a little bit more of a individual experience where it's giving them the things that they can do to contribute towards the practice success, as well as what's the overall data of what's happening within the practice.
And so it's funny because whenever we look at a dentist practice, we always say, like, when you look at someone's analytics, you can tell what they care about, because they tend to do well in things that they value and think are important, and not well in things that, they necessarily don't think are very important. And that was Matt and my first impression from looking at our demo, was like, wow, they really care about like the front office team member using this software, or and so the other thing that I was really impressed with was especially just your practice management knowledge in general. And so is that something that, over the years of having a lot of data you've learned? Like, can you talk about how you've developed the acumen that you have? Has it been over time? What has that been like?
Yeah, I can't necessarily say, like, hey, I came from a practice management background or anything. When we started Dental Intel, before Dental Intel, we had a CPA firm, and we worked with dentists, and we did consulting for dentists. And most of it was around personal financial management, tax strategy. How do you set up, yourself to protect yourself and minimize tax and keep as much money as you can, and improve your, your receivables processes, et cetera. I mean, so that's kind of the background of how we got into providing a software. We built a dashboard initially just to support what we were doing on the services side. And as we got more and more involved, we realized that the dashboard was where it was at. And it's a matter of having had conversations, and I mean, like the heartfelt crying type of conversation sometimes, with hundreds and thousands of dentists, to be able to understand what really makes the practice go. What is it that causes what? Why, if they're in a particular situation, are they in that situation, and what do they need to do in order to get out of it? And with having as many worked with as many practices as we have, and the amount of patient information that we have, that's a big contributor. Also, I am a huge number nerd. Love numbers. Anybody who knows me knows if you want to make me happy, just send me an Excel spreadsheet and say, hey, how do I do this? And will you do this for me? My friends' kids call me with their math homework. I mean, I love numbers. And so when we can look at all of that, the big data about what's going on at the macro level, we're able to see and notice a lot of different things, and what is it that's causing what. And so I would say most of our knowledge and understanding, and mine personally, has come from the side probably more of looking at the numbers and then figuring out what was it that caused that? What was it that made that successful or not successful? And then how do we continue to perpetuate that, or how do we solve that particular issue?
This episode is brought to you by Swell. So all of us who are already using Swell know that it crushes reputation management. It's like turning on a steady stream of reviews that requires no effort from your team and just works. It's amazing. Additionally, it makes it easy to stay in touch with all of your patients before and after their visits. And it even has a great way to set up a virtual waiting room. But there's more good news. Swell has a brand new version of their platform. And on top of being simpler than ever to use, You can now actually get patients to pay via mobile, which is incredible. The reason that Swell is so effective at getting reviews is they make it easy. They've now brought that same ease of use to paying for dental treatment even after patients have left the office. Mobile payments are a great way to text them a reminder so they can pay at their convenience right on their phone. You can pay via credit or debit card, ACH, or even Apple Pay or Google Pay with just a few taps. No more phone calls, no more chasing people down with emails and letters that always seem to get lost. And it gets better. This new release includes Swell Schedule, which is an easy way for patients to request an appointment time that works for them, so you can lock down those appointments quicker. Listen, Swell is one of those things that you just need to try it out, turn it on, see the results, and then you're converted and you're like, well, I'm never going to shut this off. Listeners of the Shared Practices podcast can try Swell for free for 30 days. No commitment. Just set it up, see the results for yourself before you pay anything. To take advantage of this offer, head to swellcx.com/sharedpractices. That's swellcx.com/sharedpractices.
So we'll transition into the dashboard in a minute here, but I forgot that you used to work at a CPA firm, and that's where you and Weston started this whole thing. I smash CPAs all the time on our show. Like I do not take it easy on dental CPAs.
Yeah,
I think as an industry, they are just totally, I'm sorry, but inadequate.
Right.
And that's just my general feelings on that. I feel like my beef and my criticism of them is that they are so historically driven and they're so expense reporting based, and they don't look at any projections, any future growth opportunities, any actual practice management knowledge. They just look at your staff overhead percentage and tell you what to do. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that because, as having been on both sides, what do you think about, that type of criticism?
Well, I would say it's definitely warranted. And I would say that we probably found ourselves in that same position, umpteen years ago, where we're dealing with dentists and we would, be dealing with the historical. Yeah, we're dealing with some proactive things in terms of like tax planning, tax strategy. What do you want to do with your cash? How do you get to improve your financial situation? But what we would find is as we were dealing with different dentists, we would see two practices that would, on the outside, seem to be equivalent. And one of the dentists was killing it. And while at the same time, the other dentist was struggling, could barely even pay their student in practice debt. And we're like, what is the difference? What is driving that? We've got to figure that out so that we can really help people accomplish what their goals and their objectives are. And I know that this seems like super rudimentary, at this point, but it was that was kind of like the turning point for us to be able to go figure that out. What was it? How do we help these practices? And our whole mindset shifted from reactive to proactive. How is it not that we just tell you what happened, but tell you what can happen and help you put together a strategy to get to that point by using data and information and ultimately see that come to fruition. And it's those stories that have happened time and time and time again that really, make our day and have changed that perspective. There's a story that I remember about a dentist, just as we were still kind of in the stages where we're just starting to get dental intel going, and a local dentist, he was out of Park City area, been practicing for quite a while. The most money he had ever made as a dentist, he owned his practice, was $76,000.
Oh my gosh.
And he called us up and he said, hey, I need some help. I need to get a valuation on my practice to sell my practice, because I'm just going to go be an associate the rest of my life. And I actually was the one who talked to him, and I was like, well, that's not really what we're about or what we do, but tell me what's going on. Why are you selling your practice? Well, everyone thinks I'm a bad dentist. Why do you think why do people think you're a bad dentist? And he went on to tell me, what had happened or what was going on. And it was a couple small little things. And we said, well, let's do this. We can't help you with getting a practice valuation, but why don't we plug in our data and let's take a look at your practice and see what's happening, see what's going on. We plugged into his practice. He had, if I remember right, it was just under 2,000 active patients. He was getting 20 new patients a month. I mean, if you're in a small town, 20 is not necessarily like a ton, but it's a lot for the town that he was in, especially considering that he thought he was a bad dentist. And if that's the case, he wouldn't be getting new patients like that. What we found out, though, is that he had less than 20% of his patients reschedule their hygiene appointment. And here's another thing that was interesting. He had almost 100% case acceptance.
Wow.
Which he thought was awesome,
happening?
But wasn't awesome.
Oh, because he wasn't diagnosing.
That's what was going on. He was waiting for patients to say, do this to me. He had lost all of his confidence. And so he was not necessarily, he was putting everything essentially like on a watch where he wasn't telling patients what they needed done. We noticed those things. He started putting together some systems in place to solve those things. And it was crazy. Within 2 months time frame, he was on track to make over $200,000. I ran into him a little over a year later in a restaurant, and he came up to me. I didn't even recognize the guy because his whole demeanor had changed. He was confident, and he told me that year he made $440,000 that year. Wow. And all of that had changed just by, having the right data and information and then acting on it, putting those things in place in order to get to your goal. I mean, we've had thousands of stories like that. And that's really what drives us, is how do we help people have that type of outcome instead of just telling them what's going on?
And so earlier you had touched on something that I want to circle back to, because I think this was, I don't know about you, Rob, but I really enjoyed the process of developing the metrics that we have in our dashboard, because it was a back and forth, right? It was me saying something and then you kind of pushing back on it. And half the time you saw where I was going. The other half the time you're like, no, I don't think that's the best metric. I think you should use this one instead. And one of the areas you kept pushing back on me, which I think is one of the things I'm most excited about with this new dashboard, is the proactivity of our metrics now. And so can you talk about reactive and proactive metrics and talk about that concept for our audience? Because it's something they haven't heard before, but it's sort of, we talk a lot about projections, and we've talked about projections in terms of production, but we've never talked about it in terms of other supplementary metrics. And so can you talk about using proactive projections to run your practice as opposed to reactive historical data and kind of the difference?
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember one of the places that we were talking about this was related to hygiene and pre-appointment of hygiene patients.
Yep.
And I mean, when we're looking in the past in terms of what percentage of our active patients, for example, had a scheduled hygiene appointment, that tells us one thing. But we could be trending in a total opposite direction while that number looks awesome or looks great. And while it's good to know and pat ourselves on the back, that, hey, we did a good job in the past, what we really need to watch out for is where are we heading? That's why when you're driving your car, your windshield is so big and your rearview mirror is so small, right? It's more important to see where we're going than where we've been. And so when we're looking at metrics like that, we want to look into the future and be able to see, of our active patients, what percentage of them have a future scheduled appointment. And that's the number that we should be driving to grow rather than looking back in the rearview mirror. And if we do that across everything that we're doing, then we can catch things way ahead of time instead of already getting in a car crash and then wondering how we get ourselves out of it.
And this was something that it was almost like we were doing it inherently, because our analytics-based philosophy tends to be so future-based, but we were still using some reactive data. But I would argue, and Rob, maybe you would agree with me, I would say almost everyone in our industry right now looks through the rear view mirror to drive their practice way more often than they look forward. I mean, would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, even just when you're thinking about the normal thing that a practice does with looking at data, and they're looking at production, collection, new patients. I mean, that's all reactive rearview mirror information. They go print out their day sheet at the end of the day or go pull their report at the end of the week, or, even using most analytics tools, it's all just a matter of what happened. And we need to be focused on not only what happened, but what is going to happen. And what are we going to do to either perpetuate what is happening or going to happen and make it happen more, or change that trajectory if we don't like what that outcome is.
And how does someone using your software know when they're in like a good zone for a certain metric? Like it's a proactive number. How do they know that this is adequate or, hey, this needs improvement?
So there's a lot of different ways, and great question on that. We have a customer success manager that works with every single account, and they have regular updates with them. And one of the things that they will go over with them is we put out benchmarks on a regular basis. Here's what's going on within the industry or within your geography in these particular areas. Here's where what underperforming looks like. Here's what median looks like. Here's what performing looks like, and here's where you fall in that spectrum. So then they're able to see not only where do they fall, but also what type of additional opportunity is still available. If somebody is already in the top 10 percentile, the last thing that we want to do is tell them, hey, you got to focus on trying to improve this because, yeah, you might be able to get a 1% improvement. But if there's areas where, where they're median or where they're not performing, there's a lot of those places where they can get some significant improvement. And so we have team members that are working with them on a regular basis, and we have quarterly business reviews together with them to be able to review that data and help them see what's happening, and as well as the benchmarks. Sometimes with some of our customers, that's enough. For a lot of them, they need a more in-depth approach, and they need somebody that can. A lot of times, their issues that they have are the same issues on a recurring basis, and they need some more in-depth help in solving those particular things. And you guys are awesome at that, at helping to identify those things and then helping to put those strategies in place for them.
Yeah, thanks, Rob.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And I love how you put that because it's so synergistic to what we believe in, of not like trying to excel more in your strengths, but really attacking the weaknesses, looking for the opportunity areas, and not making your case acceptance from 90 to 92. There's a diminishing return once you get higher into these numbers, that it much more effectively to look at the weak spots.
Now, a question I have, Rob, and this is more of a personal question, but you think about it, right? Like even 9,000 practices you guys have plugged into your software, like that's 5% of the market, right? In the United States or something like that. So whenever I see this data, sometimes I wonder, like, if I'm in the 90th percentile of all dental intel users, what am I actually at relative to the whole country?
Yeah,
do you have an idea of that? Because that's something I grapple with a lot.
That's a really good point. And we've gone back and looked at that. There's data that we look at, George, where when we're pulling people's data, we take a snapshot of where they were when we started, and we look at that data. Then we look at people who are using our platform and where they are in that data. Our benchmarks that we put out are typically benchmarks that are around our customer base. And our median practice is pretty close to about a top 20 percentile, industry practice. So if someone's performing at a median level within our customer base, they're in reality about a top 20% practice.
And this is like industry standards, a large skew. It's like a large, right? It's like a very unbalanced, right? There's a lot of practices sub million, and then there's like a long tail on that graph. So you guys are kind of like more like a very split shift of just the top 20% of all the practices in the United States. Is that what you're saying?
Well, it's interesting. It's I've grappled with this a lot. And what is it? Is it the chicken or is it the egg? We have a lot of practices. They're very successful, and they come and they utilize us to be able to continue to maintain that. But at the same time, they're having huge, significant improvements. We also have a lot of practices that come to work with us and use our data, and they're struggling. And they also see huge improvements, and then they're putting themselves into that classification. So, we have a mix on a little bit of both of those, where those practices come in. But I would say our average practice tends to be larger than what the industry average practice would be, and is more successful than what an average industry practice would be.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think about it, like if I'm a dentist that doesn't really care, I'm probably sitting near average. I'm probably not paying for dental intel to like tell me how I can improve because I probably don't want to. I mean, it just logically makes sense. And then also like you grow and improve, and then you kind of further put yourself in that category. So I think it's both. I don't think it's one or the other.
Well, well, I won't even say, but sometimes people, I think they doubt themselves.
Yeah.
And, they look at, hey, I'm going to be spending X dollars to be able to add this product. And yeah, an average practice that's doing this is increasing by $300,000. And so obviously it's the ROI on that is insane. But people doubt in themselves and their ability to execute on it. And it's sad because there's a lot of people, I think, that continue to struggle when they don't have to. Man, I want to go back to one quick thing that you mentioned before. We didn't really talk a ton on, but the fact that a lot of what we're doing is geared towards the team members in the practice. Mm-hmm. Get some help. You have people in your practice that care about your practice. They want it to be successful. Most of the time, they just don't know what to do to have it be successful. And so they just get involved in frenetic behavior. If we can use data and information to shape their activities and the things that they do, and just spoon feed to them little bits of things that they need to do every single day, just one little spoonful of something that they're doing to make your practice better. I mean, I don't care how much you suck as a dentist, you can't help but get better overall as a business and as a practice. And I'm sorry for saying it that way, but you're just going to just be getting better, even in spite of yourself.
Yeah. And it's funny. I actually had a conversation with my hygienist about this because sometimes my staff, they think that every practice runs the way mine does. And all of my hygienists have logins to analytics software. They all know their reappointment rates. They all know their fluoride, and they're very big on all of their numbers. And I told my hygienist, I'm like, this is kind of rare. This isn't normal that, staffs log in and they know all their numbers like you guys do. And they argue with me. Like they'll be like, my reappointment rate is higher than it says. And then we have to go back and like check and verify. And, but her comment was, there are days that I think I'm doing really well. And then I check the data and I'm actually not. And so when you can get a team to buy in, they really appreciate the data. And I think that that's something that, as our coaching department has become more team driven, a more team driven product has just made a lot more sense for us. But I want to, so obviously there's like over 50 probably. I don't know exactly the number of analytics or metrics we have in our dashboard with you guys, but I think that the changes I would put in, are you thinking of the number? Do you know it, Rob?
I was just looking through some of it, and it's definitely a lot more than 50.
Yeah, it's a lot more than 50 KPIs that we have in there. But like, if I was thinking about the changes, I'd put them in 3 specific areas, right? There's proactivity as a concept is something new that is, becoming a bigger emphasis on our dashboard with you guys. And then the second 2 are visits. And the other one is, I think a lot of the patient growth and value metrics that we have now with you guys it's a newer concept that you guys have introduced us to. So, I think that I want you to talk a little bit about the lifetime value and the growth trajectory, because these are things we've looked at before. We just measured them in a less accurate way. And so I think that it's funny because these are things we've cared about. You guys have a metric for it. So it's a lot easier to coach directly on it. So can you talk about those 2 things in terms of patient value and growth?
For sure. If you're a practice owner, not only are you a dentist, but you own a business. And the idea of owning that business is that it's going to help produce revenue for you and produce an income for you. But also the idea is to maximize its value, its long-term value. And there's a lot of ways that you go about that. But if you want to be able to measure and project what this is doing for you and what that value is, you need to look at things in a little bit different way. We need to see, what is the average lifetime value of an active patient? How many active patients do we have? How long on average is a patient staying in our practice? How many patients are we bringing in and new patients in relation to the patients that we're losing? What's the reasons that, that we are losing patients? It's all just a symbiotic relationship between some of those data points, so that you can see and know, okay, my average patient is worth this much money to me in collections or production over a period of time. They're going to stay this amount of time. I'm growing at this type of rate. And I'm talking growth, not new patients. I'm talking new patients and reactivated patients minus attrition patients and minus patients that are status change that that you go and mark as inactive. That's your true growth rate, because you can add, 1 billion new patients and still not grow. I remember a practice that started working with us using our data and came on. They were in Central California. Hopefully I'm not directing too much or making it too obvious, but this particular practice in the year before had over 10,000 new patients, over
Whoa.
800 new patients a month. In that same year, they decreased in their collections by $1 million.
Wow.
Well, what was going on is they were losing over 10,000 patients in that year, and their lifetime value and their average age, meaning their average amount of time that a patient stayed with them, were both really, really low. So we want to look at these things so that we can preserve this asset that you have. How do we preserve and maximize the value of this asset that you have so it can produce the best living for you possible over an extended period of time, and that you have an asset that truly is of value when it comes time for you to maybe sell your practice.
And this is an area that, sometimes when you're really deep in analytics, you we are and you are, we operate in this world where things make so much sense to us. And then we go back out into reality where the majority of dentists are just so opposite of this mentality. I think if you go online and you sort of see what dentists say, there's almost no value placed on retention. And I think this is my personal pet peeve. And so one of our pillars of growth is retention-led growth. And we really try to help dentists see the value of ReCare visits and help them see the value of retention in their practices. Because I think this is such an area that's missed. People keep focusing on, growing their practice through acquisition of new patients or through all these other methods. And they don't realize kind of the easiest, most effective way to grow your practice is retention.
For sure.
And so can you touch on that?
Can I talk to some macro data on that, by the way, as it relates to new patients? So we've ran a lot of numbers on this. And by the way, some of the numbers that we've ran is we look at all the metrics and data points you could possibly look at, and we correlate it to profitability. Okay. So, some things that would not necessarily directly correlate, we're comparing every single one of those things, and we're watching the trend to see when there is high profitability, what other things are in place. The number one metric, by the way, to the highest correlating metric to profitability is hygiene reappointment. Practices that are good at retaining their patients will be more profitable than any other practice. And we've ran these numbers and looked at these things at a macro level, like I said, on 100 million patients. We looked at this so many times that if you can reappoint or reschedule your patients at a performing or an elite level, and you have new patients at a underperforming level, you will outperform almost any practice, more so than practices that get new patients at an elite level and even just reappoint at a median level. Even practices that are getting new patients at an elite level, or a performing level, and are reappointing their patients at a near performing level. A practice that can reappoint their patients and retain their patients at a good, consistent basis will outperform almost any practice over time.
That's so refreshing to hear, because I can't tell you, whenever we onboard a new client, basically while we just finished the greeting of the call on the first call, we look at hygiene pre-appointment, and that's the number we focus on instantly. And it's very typical that a practice they're taking over is inadequate in that number. And they've been getting 20 new patients a month for years, yet they haven't added any hygiene days. And that's complete out the back door.
Some things I really appreciate you saying that, Matt. And sorry, George, there's one quick thing I just wanted to bring up with this. You need to consider, you guys that are listening to this podcast, that when you're hearing every dentist telling you that you need to do something, that's the average. That's the average dentist. Okay. If everybody says, hey, we should be focusing on this, that's going to give you the average. If you want to be average, you should do that. If you don't want to be average, if you want to be a top performer, you need to find people like George and Matt and listen to them and the things that they're telling you. It's going to be different things than what the average dentist is telling you, but they're the things that are going to get you to where you want to go.
Oh man, Rob, that was so our company slogan is redefining average. Because we have a big issue with average. It really annoys us because I almost find it irresponsible that people are allowed to speak publicly about certain things because they're actually making the industry worse, and that's one of my big things. So it's so refreshing to see how aligned we are. And, I think one of our big things is we really push the limits on expanding hygiene. And it works so well in our clients' practices because we're really big on retention. And sometimes we'll get listeners who will try adopting the same philosophy without the retention. It doesn't work. And you have to kind of follow the whole recipe, and really strong retention throughout the entire practice, both on a reactivation of patients and a proactive approach, is incredibly important. And so it's really refreshing to hear that, you guys also view that as the most important thing, because that's something that we just keep hammering into everyone we talk to. So I want to wrap up talking about visits. This is something that our audience is going to hear more of, but they haven't heard a whole lot of. So can you talk about what you guys do with visits, how you look at them, and why you find it as an effective thing to measure and track?
Yeah. When you're looking at data, I'm going to backtrack this for a second.
Sure.
I ask people all the time what they measure, and they usually always tell me three things: production, collection, new patients.
And after this episode, reappointment rate.
Yeah. Well, I'm saying hopefully this group here is a little bit smarter, and they are going to be looking at different things. They are going to be looking at things like reappointment rate. But normally that's what they're looking at, and there's not one of those that tells you that you made money. None of those tell you that you made money. And one of the whole points of being in dentistry is to make money. I mean, I won't say it's the only, because it's definitely not, but it's one of the reasons to become a dentist and be in dentistry. So if we want to make money, we need to look at the right things. And so we have a formula that we feel is way more valuable. And what we need to do first is, when we look at production, there's nothing, if we don't reach our production goal, there's nothing inherent about that tells us what to do. And so what happens is, and you probably, all of you guys who are on here listening have experienced this, you haven't reached your production goal and everybody is standing around and like, oh, we didn't reach our goal. And so here's what we're going to do. We're just going to go try harder. We're just going to do better. We're going to push more. We're going to whatever. I mean, and that's not a strategy, nor is that sustainable. So we got to break that apart. When you're looking at production, we need to know, is this a quantitative issue or a qualitative issue? Are we not having enough patients come in? Or when they come in, are we not producing enough on those patients? So we need to track how many visits are we having, and then we need to track how successful are we in those interactions within those visits. If we break it out that way, it becomes super obvious how to solve the problem. Oh, I have a quantitative issue. We're producing enough on the patients when they're here. We're just not getting enough patient visits. Let's get more patient visits, right? And then there's all the things that contribute to that. Oh, we're getting plenty of patient visits, but we're just not producing enough on the patients when they're here. And then all the things that contribute towards that. So we like looking at it that way. And we find that in focusing on it that way, we're more likely to get from facts to meaning, and then ultimately to action, which is really what we care about, is that The facts is the data. The meaning is like what's causing it and why it's happening. And the action is therefore what? What are we going to do based upon our newfound understanding?
It's funny. There's so many redundancies we just use different language to talk about the same things. We call that patient efficiency. So we'll call a dentist very patient efficient or very patient inefficient, based on essentially their revenue per visit, kind of like what you're talking about. And, I want to thank you for coming on, Rob. So much alignment, and I think that's the thing I'm really excited about is, from the moment that we started talking, I feel like, you've helped us refine what we do really well and help us do it better. And I think that's kind of what we're committed to. So we're really excited about working with Dental Intel moving forward. And, you guys will hear more about all these metrics that we're introducing on the show. And we're really excited for things to come. So thanks, Rob.
Thanks, you guys. And likewise, we're really excited about working with you. You guys are doing some things that are so innovative and that our industry really needs, and looking at things in a different way, in a different perspective. That's not the same thing, just over and over and over again. That's something that worked for Sally, and hopefully it'll work for you. It's a custom tailored approach based around what really is happening and what's going on to help these practices focus on the right things to reach their objectives. So we're excited to work with you. And one of the things I'm excited about with this is to track the data on the people that we're working with you, and then see what happens with those practices. I've got a pretty good idea about what's going to happen, but I'm excited to see that come to fruition.
So are we, Rob. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure having you on, and we'll have you back on the show at some point.
Sounds good. Anytime. Thanks, guys.